Hello. Well, now that you've got your quad up and flying, you'll probably want to practice flying in line of sight first, just to get the hang of how it feels like that. It's much easier to do that than just jumping into FPV straight away. So in this video, I'm going to give you some basic tips, little things that I found useful to practice when I was starting out. Maybe they'll help you, maybe they won't, I don't know, but I'll give them to you anyway. But just before we do that, since we're going to be potentially flying a little bit further away from ourselves now, we'll also look at how you can set up the failsafe in the receiver so that we can make the quad do some specific thing if we lose control or we lose the radio contact with it. Speaking of losing control, I think this is a good time to remind ourselves of just how many complicated little bits and pieces are required to all work together in just the right way to get this quadcopter flying and to keep it flying in the way that you intended to. And you have to remember that the risk of something going wrong is not zero, it's much more than zero. So if you're going out to your local park or something, it's all very well to take risks with yourself, you know, flying close to yourself and stuff like that, but you don't really have the right to take risks with other people or their kids or their pets or their cars or their houses or just whatever you happen to be flying around. So just to sort of remind ourselves of that and to drum this point home yet again, I made this little diagram to display visually what I'm trying to get across here. So we have you up here, this is the pilot, and over here we have the quadcopter. And this is, of course, a grossly simplified diagram, but this is not far off what the typical person who buys a ready-to-fly quadcopter and just takes it out of the box and starts flying it. I mean, they're not thinking too much more than that, but that's not you, because you're building your own quadcopter and you know quite a bit more about it. So you know that there's a huge long chain of things that all need to be connected just the right way to get it to work. So you've got a transmitter, radio signal going to the receiver, and then these are all connected. So let me just put in some arrows. And this is sort of the flow of information, you might say. And generally these arrows here are not such a problem in practice because they're all physically connected. So we have servo cables going between these two. We have some more servo cables there, and then these are probably going to be soldered directly to each other. So the green arrows here are not something that's going to be failing very often. So let's go back over here. There is, of course, a connection between you and your transmitter. Now, when you're a newbie, this is going to be one of the weakest links. I hate to say it, but that's the way it is. When you start out, you and your perception and your skill and your reaction time and all that kind of thing is going to be a pretty weak link. So it's not, the pilot and the transmitter are not one thing in this chain. They're two separate things, definitely. And it's easy when you get better at flying to think that this link gets it's not really important anymore, but it still is. You're not a perfect, nobody's perfect. You could still make mistakes. And then over here, this is what we're going to be looking at next. This link is probably something that fails or can tend to fail the most after you're a bit more of an experienced pilot. This is probably what you need to worry about next. And this is the radio signal. So the radio signal can, of course, be obstructed by buildings or trees or vehicles or earth, like doesn't travel very well through a dirt hill, things like that. So we'll look at what we can do to minimize the damage if that connection gets lost in a minute. And then one other thing that I put this arrow here because when you're flying line of sight, this is it needs to, the pilot needs to get some information back about what's going on. So this arrow symbolizes you looking at the quadcopter, and you might think, well, what's the problem with that? But I have seen quite a few cases where, especially with a small quadcopter like this, it's easy to go a little bit too far away and then you can't tell which way the quad is facing. And this can also be a little bit more prevalent with newer pilots because they can get it further away when they didn't intend to get it further away, and that makes the problem worse because now they're sort of panicking about that too. And you'll notice that I've left some empty space in here because in the next video we'll be looking at FPV flying, and then you have an even larger or longer chain of dependent pieces that all have to work just right in order for it to be successful. But for now we'll just keep it like this and remind ourselves that what we're doing is pretty high tech and it's not trivial, and something will go wrong sometime, and you don't want it to go wrong while you're flying over somebody else, or yourself either, but definitely not somebody else. So let's have a look at what a failsafe does and how we can set it up with this particular transmitter. There are actually two different types of failsafe. Let me just go back to that diagram again. So the failsafe that we're going to look at here is between the transmitter and the receiver, and this is most commonly the link that will get broken if you go too far away and so on. There is another type of failsafe that you can set up in the Betaflight configurator, and that is to handle what would happen if this link between the receiver and the flight controller was broken or damaged somehow. I'm not going to look at that because that's never actually happened to me. It's quite rare. As I said, these are actually physically connected and they're very close to each other, and even a really bad crash is probably not going to break this connection. So I'll just leave that aside for the moment, and we will look at what is called a receiver failsafe. So that's this one. So the receiver failsafe is a setting that lives in the receiver, and it will say what channel settings the receiver should give to the flight controller if the transmitter is turned off or it loses signal somehow. And some receivers do this by, you would turn it on and then you turn the receiver on and then you put your sticks to where you want them to be, and your switches, I've got these two switches set up here. So you put everything to the position that you would like it to go to when you lose radio control. For example, you would most likely want the throttle to be off, and maybe one of these other switches. In my case, I'm going to have that one up because I've put arming on a switch. So I want that switch up and the throttle down. That's what's important to me for this particular quad. And then on the receiver there's a button, and you would just push that button and it would remember whatever positions you've set up your sticks to be, so that when you lose radio contact, the receiver will just go to that position that you've preset. This radio works a little bit differently. It doesn't have that button on the receiver. But what we can do is long press on OK, then go into System, then RX Receiver Setup, and then Failsafe. Now at the moment, oh, whoops, it looks like I've been doing something here. Hold on a minute. I'm just going to reset everything to defaults. Sorry, let me... Okay, so this is what you should see the first time you come to this menu. It just says everything is off. Now, off, what that means is that when the radio or when the receiver loses the signal from the transmitter, whatever positions the sticks were in and the switches, whatever you happen to be doing at the last moment that it lost contact, it will just keep doing that. So let's say you were half throttle and you were rolling to the right and then you lost radio control, it would just keep rolling to the right at half throttle. Probably not what you want to do. So to look at the most obvious setting, I would want to, like I said, I want the throttle to go to 0. So let me go to channel 3 because that is throttle, and I come in here with OK. Now it says off, and this display here excuse me, here is showing me what the current position of that channel is. So if I move my throttle stick, oh, it's too shiny, but I'm moving the throttle stick and you can see it going up and down there. So when I put the throttle all the way down, it goes down like that. So that's the position of the throttle I would want it to go to when we lose radio control. And then I just push the up and down buttons to switch that on. And then long press of cancel. And now we can see that it says minus 100%. So for this, 0 is the middle, minus 100 is all the way down. And then, very importantly, you have to long press cancel to go back from this screen, otherwise it won't save it. If I just do a short press here and then come back, I've lost that setting. Watch out for that, because you might think you've set the failsafe when you didn't. So let me do that again. Channel 3, failsafe on, long press cancel again, and you get that high-pitched beep. And then if I come back into failsafe, we should see that that minus 100% is stored. Now for me that's not quite enough, because I've made another setting where instead of arming by going like that, I've put my arming onto a switch. So when I go like that, it will arm, and it will spin the motors up even when the throttle is down. I'll show you that at the end of this video, but for now just know that I have to also have the switch up in order to disarm properly. Otherwise my throttle will go to 0 and the quad will fall out of the sky, which is what I want to happen. I don't want it to just drift off further and further away from me. So what I need to do is also this channel here. Oh, I can't remember what channel that is actually. By the way, if you don't know what channel is which, you can come into this menu, Functions Setup, and go to Display, and this will show you. You can just move all your sticks and your channels around, and it will show you which channel is which. So for this switch, it is channel 5. So let me go back to receiver setup again. Failsafe. So channel 5 and that up position is where I want the switch to be, and then I put failsafe on, and then I go cancel once, cancel twice, and then I'll just check it to make sure it's stuck. Right, so now I've got channel 3 and 5 will both go to -100%. And then you want to check this before you go flying just to make sure that it actually worked. So let's have a little check. This is the quad that is bound to. So all of these settings that you're making will apply to whichever model you have currently selected in there. So my G160 is this little one. So the way you would check that is just by plugging it in, and then I'm going to arm, and then I'm going to raise the throttle a little bit like that, and then I'm going to switch the transmitter off, and it should disarm and stop spinning the motors. So okay, so that's what you want to see, and that will stop you from just drifting off into the wild blue yonder and losing your quad. It'll make it drop to the ground, and hopefully it'll be easier to find. So that's the setting that I like to do. You might like to do it something different. Some people like to make the throttle go almost to 0, so you could put it to something like about there, so that instead of just dropping completely from the sky, it's going to fall a little bit slower, hopefully. But the downside to that is that when it gets to the ground, it doesn't know it's on the ground, so even if it's stuck in the grass, it's going to keep trying to spin the props. So I don't really like to have it like that. But anyway, that's how you set up failsafe, and it's a good idea to do that before you start flying further away from yourself. Okay, I've put the top cover on now, just to give it a little bit more protection if I should happen to crash it again. And I've put the antennas up here. I've just used a bit of hot glue to hold those on. It's not really ideal. If I have a crash, it's probably going to break free, but that's what I'm going to go with for now. And I thought what I'd do next is just show you some of the drills, I guess you could say, that I found quite helpful when I was learning to get used to flying and feel comfortable with it. So let me just plug it in. Right, so the first thing you'll notice is that I have a landmark here, and this is not just because it's easier to take off from there than it is from the grass. I wanted to have a fixed point of reference that I'm going to use to, you know, as a target to move around and over and stuff like that. So first thing I would suggest is to just practice hovering in one spot. And when you're first starting out, I mean, it's a little bit boring, but when you're first starting to learn to fly, you may find that this takes all of your focus and concentration. So it's boring to watch, but it is actually keeping your brain quite busy. And it's a very fundamental thing for learning to control the throttle, and just looking at the frame as it moves and sensing how it's about to move in the next few moments and trying to counteract that. Yeah, so this is just a very, very fundamental thing. And don't worry about trying to keep it in one place too much to begin with. Just try and focus on the height so that you're not going up and down, because the throttle is probably the trickiest thing to manage. But once you've got it sorted out, then use this target point and try and hover over the target spot like that. So I'm just trying to keep it in that place over the rubbish bin. And once you've got the hang of that, you can also practice trying to land it on there as well. To practice getting the hang of how the throttle responds, you can maybe switch between hovering at this altitude and a higher altitude, and just sort of alternate between them and bring it up and down and get it to try and stop and level at that position as quickly as you can. For example, oh, it's starting to rain, damn it. Okay. So I'm starting at about this altitude, that's my low one. My high one will be there. And then bring it back down to the low one. And then up to the high one. Down to the low one. Okay, the battery is oops, battery is done there, but if you try that simulation that I had on the computer, you probably will be reasonably good at that to begin with, I hope. Next thing I would probably try is just trying moving it left and right. So move it away somewhere, just using left and right only, and then get used to the way it moves and how you can stop it from moving when you want to. And also perhaps practice bringing it back over that middle position. So I'm just bringing it over the rubbish bin and take it away somewhere to the left and then bring it back and try and get it to stop over the bin like that. That actually worked quite well. It's harder than it looks, so that's where I wanted it to stop. Right, so that should get you used to doing left and right, and then you also want to do that front and back, and you don't really want to have it backing into you while you're standing there, so come to the side of your target position a little bit and then move it forwards and then bring it back and try and get it to stop again in that position over the rubbish bin or whatever your target object is. And this will also get you used to the fact that when you tilt the frame so that it's not level anymore, you actually have to apply a little bit more throttle. So if I leave my throttle constant and I tilt it forward, you see that it loses a lot of height. So you have to compensate for that with the throttle, and you'll get used to that just by these simple drills of going left and right. Like that. So probably the next thing to get the hang of is learning to yaw the quad left and right. And this is where things start to get tricky, because now when you move the stick forward, the pitch and roll stick forward, it's not going to go forward, it's going to go whichever way it's facing. So let's do that, and the way I would do it is by just yawing it a little bit to each side and then moving backwards and forwards. And each time you try it, maybe move it a little bit further to each side until you're facing 90 degrees away from you. So let me show you what I mean. Alright, so I'll yaw it about that much and then go forwards. And then come back to my spot, yaw it the other way and go forwards and come back. So your mental or your frame of reference is going to have to change. So 90 degrees, forwards, back, and then 90 degrees the other way, forwards, back, and then I guess just sort of mix it up a little bit. So you've got, maybe you go that way, then you go forwards, and then you go right. And wow, this battery is useless. Gonna have to swap batteries, but just mix it up a bit so that you're doing a combination of forward and back and left and right and so on. So probably the next thing I would do after that is to start working towards doing some figure eights out in front of you like that. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to learn to do a coordinated turn, which is where we turn using roll and yaw together. But we'll start off making it start off a simple version, which is just we go out to the left, we turn it around and we come back and go to the right and turn it around like that, just pretty much in a straight line, so it's not really a figure eight. So let me see if I can do that. So get it nicely under control before you move anywhere else. Alright, so I'll turn it that way and I'll make it go out there, and then I'll turn it around and then I'll bring it back so it's heading forwards in front of me. Slow down, turn it back around 180 degrees, and then have it come past. So it's just going in a straight line, but this will get used to having it fly past in front of you, but not in the easy to use orientation. And then once you've done that a few times, try and turn a little bit slower, or no, keep your forward speed. So instead of stopping completely, keep the pitch forward a little bit, and then turn with yaw as well. So I'll try and do that in front of me, but so don't stop completely, just keep going at a slow speed and use the yaw to bring it round like that. So slow yaw movement, and then you'll be doing figure eights. And if you only do yaw, let's see what happens if I only do yaw. Oh, that works fine, yeah. So I'm not actually using any roll at this point. Just turning with yaw and keeping it pitched forward a little bit. And one of the trickiest things about flying these is flying them nose in, which is when the nose is pointing in at you. And this is just something that comes with time and practice, I think, like a lot of things. But to get used to it, you can just hover it somewhere not too close to you, maybe out to about here. Let's put it here where we can see over the horizon, and just try and hold it still and turn it all the way around. And when it's facing you like this, now your pitch and roll inputs are going to be backwards, and it gets a bit confusing. But if you have enough space, like I do here, this should not be too shouldn't be too scary, because you're not going to crash into anything. So now if I roll to the right, it goes left, and if I roll, whoops, if I roll to the left, it goes right. So you need to really, wow, that's quite tricky. I don't practice that enough myself, I think, but yeah, that is definitely something that you want to have a little bit of a try at least when you're getting started. And then after that, you might want to try a turn that's larger and longer, and will require you, or it doesn't really require you, but it will really help you if you add a little bit of roll while you're doing the turn, as well as yaw. So not just yaw, but we're going to be coordinated with yaw and roll as we turn, so that these two sticks are going to sort of follow each other like that. So this is yaw and roll left, yaw and roll right. Oops. Oh. So the way I would do that is by, instead of doing a figure eight, horizontally in front of you, start out by heading out in one direction, maybe 45 degrees or so out that way, doing a nice big turn, and then coming back in at 45 degrees and try and stop here again. And then also do it the other way around. I find I can turn one way. I think I turn left quite comfortably, but I can't turn right as comfortably, so maybe I should do this as well to get used to it. But anyway, this is what I'm meaning. So I'll head out that way, and then I'll just do a nice big slow turn, and I'm putting some roll into it, and I didn't really go 45 degrees over there, and I've ended up not quite where I wanted to be, so that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. Let me try going this way. So a bit of yaw and a bit of roll at the same time. Nice big curve, and try coming in from that 45-degree angle. That's better. See, I told you I could turn better going left. And bring it back in. And when you get to about here, you might want to yaw back to face it away from you so that you don't panic as it's heading towards you nose in. If you have enough space and you have another object like this little bush here I'm going to use as my example, you might like to also try doing figure eights around these two obstacles. This is going to make it a little bit harder because instead of just turning wherever you feel like, now you have a specific point where you have to actually aim for. So let's try that. So you're going forwards and then you're taking a nice wide turn. You may have to readjust it halfway around, and then you're coming in this way. I like figure eights because it makes you do a right turn and then a left turn, so you get practice at doing both directions of turn. And just try and keep everything smooth and under control. So that's not really what I wanted to do there. Maybe this is something else that I could use a bit more practice at. A little bit too fast there. But we are at least doing the figure eight around those 2 points. You'll probably find that the battery lasts a long time with this kind of gentle flying too. Anyway, you get the idea. This is just the same as before, but with some targets. Oh, another thing that might be useful to try is, this is another thing that I find it's easy to do one way than the other. Try and reverse your figure eight to go the other direction sometimes as well. So this time when I go out to the left side of me, I'm making a left turn. Whoa. And when I come past to the right, I'm doing a right turn. Whoa, kind of skidding out there. So this direction I find more difficult. One other type of hovering practice that you might like to try once you are a bit more familiar with nose in flying is just to slowly turn it around and yaw, and just keep hovering over that one spot and keep the altitude constant as well. This is pretty tricky, but it's good for practice, I think. So let me see if I can do it. So I'm going to try and stay at about this height, and I'm yawing to the left gradually. Whoa, my goodness, this is hard. So yeah, it is hard because your point of reference is constantly changing. I can't even do this. Oh, this is a lot harder than I thought. So this one really keeps your brain working hard. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is embarrassing. Alright, that's rotating to the left. Now if I yaw to the right while I'm trying to do that, oh my goodness. Oh man, this is hard. Okay, I guess this is sort of an advanced level practice, isn't it? Oh man, I'm losing. My altitude is all over the place. I'm hardly managing to stay over the bucket at all. But I think if you do this for quite a while, you will get better at it. That's the theory anyway. Alright, enough of that. So after you've spent some time flying in auto level mode and you're getting a bit more comfortable with the throttle control and how to move all the sticks together at the same time, and your brain is starting to make this all a little bit more natural for you, you might want to also try rate mode, which is not auto level. So this will let you tip the quadcopter completely upside down. So you have to do this very carefully, and you can't do it for very long. You have to be quick about it, and then you have to get it the right way up again. And while it's upside down, you do not want to have the throttle up. So you don't want to be powering down into the ground. You want to make the throttle go to zero, basically. And The easiest way to do this is just to drop the throttle stick completely to the bottom, but with the current settings that we have, at least what I have on my settings that I was just using there, I still have this thing motor stop on. So when I put the throttle right down to 0, the motors are actually going to stop, and that is good in that it will prevent me from powering the quadcopter directly down into the ground. But the other thing that happens when the motors stop is you don't have any control over movement, which is not good because that would stop you from tipping it the right way up again, potentially. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn this motor stop off so that when my throttle goes down to 0, the motors are still going to be spinning just a bit, so I'll still have some control. And I'll save and reboot there. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change from using the throttle stick to arm. So what I'm currently doing is I put the throttle all the way down and then push it to the right, so your right to arm. But I'm going to change it to using a switch to arm. So if we go to the modes tab, we have the switch. So switch auxiliary 2 that's what I'm using to switch between auto level mode or angle mode and rate mode. So when I put my switch to this side, I'm going to be in rate mode. And I'm going to use another switch to do arming. So this is going to be aux 1, and this is my 3-position switch. So I'm going to make it so that when it goes all the way down, then the quadcopter will be armed. And when you make this setting, so I'll just save that. Now this is going to be the only way to arm the quadcopter, by using that switch. So the result of that setting is that now when I use this switch, that switch will arm the quad like this. So this is just one more thing to remember if you crash or you're trying to land or something, that you have to flip this switch while you're landing. So that's why I suggested that it might be easier not to do that to begin with. But once you start getting into rate mode and doing flips and stuff, you kind of need to use the switch to arm, because especially if you want to flip upside down and do a cool yaw spin, to do that you're going to put the throttle all the way down and then you're going to go like that, and that's going to disarm, and then you'll just fall out of the sky and crash. Here, allow me to demonstrate that for you. So yeah, so in the long run you'll probably want to put arming on a switch like this. And I was just doing a little test now, and there's one other setting that I forgot to do, and that is that when you arm and take off and you're flying around, you can also make it so that you can turn the switch off in the air while you're flying, but it won't disarm until you put the throttle down to 0, which is quite handy. So what I usually do is, as I'm approaching to land, I'll flip the switch up to turn it off to disarm, and then only when I exactly touch the ground and go like that, it will stop. So I'll show you that setting when I get back inside, but for now I'm just going to have to flip the switch as I land to do it manually. Anyway, so doing a flip is it's a bit scary at first maybe, but it's like everything else, you just do it a few times and you get the hang of it. So all you have to do is get into a hover, and then just before you do the flip, bump the throttle up just a little bit to like jump up in the air, and then put it to 0, and then hold the stick all the way across, and the quad will flip all the way around, and then you bring the throttle back to where it was. So it's not too tricky, but it all happens very quickly, and it's the timing of it that is what takes getting used to. So on here I have angle mode and rate mode, so I'm just going to take off in angle mode. So this is angle mode or auto level. So if I let go of the stick, it's just going to auto level. If I switch into rate mode and I bump it to the left a bit, now I let go of the stick and it does not auto level. So I have to level it myself. But if you want to flip, that's the way it has to be. So I'll just show you what I mean. So you just pump the throttle And if you don't give yourself a bit of a jump beforehand, you'll find that you go down too low when you land or when you finish. So normally when you're just starting out with this, you do it a little bit higher, like maybe about there, so that you've got more room to spare if you make a mistake. And I've changed some settings on this so that the speed that it spins around at is a speed that I'm quite used to. So that's why I was able to do it fairly well to start with. But chances are you'll have to do it quite a few more times to get the hang of it. So anyway, that's flipping left and right. Whoops. Didn't quite see what I mean about being high enough. Alright, and we can also do forward and back. Those are a little bit harder because it's harder to see exactly how far it's rotated. Yeah. So anyway, that's about all I can do in rate mode and line of sight. I can't do any cool flying like Mr. Quad Mover. This is as far as I can take it. Yeah, but I don't fly in rate mode and line of sight much anyway. Before I go back out and try this again, let me also make that other setting that I was mentioning before. It's this one here on the configuration page. Disarm motors regardless of throttle value when arming via aux channel. So arming via aux channel is what I'm doing with my switch. So the default setting for this is to have it on or enabled, and that means that when you turn your arming switch off, no matter what you're doing, the motors are going to stop completely and you'll fall out of the sky if you were flying. But by disabling this option, this will mean that when I flip my arming switch off, I can keep flying until the throttle goes to 0. So this makes it very easy to land, because at the moment that you land, you're going to be putting your throttle to 0, and then it will disarm at the same time for you automatically. So you can do a nice landing without having it bumping around, and you don't have to switch the switch off manually at the same moment that you land. So let me show you how this works. I'll just save and reboot. So with that setting, when I arm, if I just leave the throttle at 0 like that, I can just disarm. So this much is unchanged. Disarm. But if the throttle was up a bit and I disarm, for example, let's me just raise the throttle a little bit, and I disarm, it stays there. I mean, it stays flying until I put the throttle to 0. So if I demonstrate how that's useful when you're actually landing, I take off, and now I disarm because I'm getting ready to land, and when I bring it down here, and the moment that I cut the throttle, it will disarm for me. So that's how I like to have it. You may prefer something different, but I think that's quite a convenient way to do it. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I hope that might give you a few ideas of some things to practice when you're just starting out. Thanks for watching.